They fired me in a Slack message I wasn't supposed to see for days before my bonus vested, and accidentally left me logged in. It was a group thread I'd been quietly removed from weeks ago, but someone forgot to uncheck my alias. I watched in real time as they called it a clean exit. No warning, no conversation, just Brittany typing, "So glad that's finally done." If you're enjoying this, please subscribe and share your support. Keeps the stories coming. My stomach didn't drop. It twisted, slow, deliberate, acidic, like it already knew this was coming. I sat frozen at my desk, the same desk I'd held for 8 years, watching them celebrate like I'd been a paperweight someone finally had the nerve to toss. The kicker: I was still technically employed, still had my badge, my benefits, my logins, and most importantly my contract. And that's where their real mistake began. They thought I'd be too humiliated to fight, that I'd slink away quietly like a tired old employee who didn't fit into their glittery modern culture. What they didn't know is I'd already seen the storm coming, and I'd been planning for this 4 months. The unraveling started slow. I'd spent over a decade as senior compliance lead at Ridgeline Logistics Tech, a company that looked sleek on the outside but ran on duct tape and denial. I was the one who kept them out of lawsuits, cleaned up their contract messes, and rewrote vendor agreements that would have sunk them in court. I knew every buried clause, every exemption loophole, every executive's blind spot. My job was to make their recklessness look like strategy. But when the new VP came in, Brad, he didn't care about compliance. He cared about optics, flash, youth, culture, decks with disruptor energy. He never once asked what I did, just how fast I could offboard redundant functions. That was his first red flag. The second was Brittany. She joined as a junior project assistant, no legal training, no experience in vendor law, no real clue what compliance even meant. But she was shiny, loud, confident in the way only someone untouched by consequences could be. Brad liked her immediately. Within 2 weeks, she was shadowing me. Within 4, she was coning contracts. By month 3, my name started disappearing from meeting invites. No confrontation, no performance review, just a slow, subtle ghosting from my own role. At first I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that maybe I was just being territorial. But the signs kept stacking. Emails that used to come to me were now going to her. Slack threads I created were repurposed with her name as lead. The biggest red flag came when a quarterly vendor negotiation, usually handled only by me or legal, was reassigned to Brittany. She smiled while telling me about it, said it would help her grow. I smiled back and said nothing, because by then, I had already pulled out my original employment contract from 2015, the one they apparently forgot existed. Clause 7.4b. It sat on page 19 in a sea of legalese, unchanged, untouched, unupdated, because during the 2019 compliance refresh, they'd asked junior HR staff to handle contract revisions, and apparently skipped over legacy employees, probably figured we'd retire soon or quietly fade out. But clause 7.4b was my golden gun. It stated in very clear, binding language that if I were terminated within 14 days of my annual bonus vesting, I'd be entitled to 20% of Ridgeline's net quarterly profits, not just my department, company-wide. Back in 2015, that clause was a weird negotiation relic, a counter I added when they wouldn't move on salary. They never expected to grow this big, never expected it to be enforceable. This quarter, we were clocking over $7 million in net, and my vesting date, 4 days away. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest colleague, Diego, the only person I halfway trusted. Instead, I started documenting every mistake Brittany made, every ignored warning, every reassignation of duties. I sent polite emails, flagged policy errors, attached contracts with redline edits that were never acknowledged. I CC'd HR quietly, subtly, patiently, because I knew the longer they ignored me, the worse they looked. The more data I had, and all the while, they kept pushing me out until the humiliation became public. The vision party was the final nail. It was hosted on the rooftop of our downtown building. Drinks, speeches, team awards. I didn't get an invite. That's how they played it. Plausible deniability. Oh, it must have been a mistake. If I ever asked, I didn't. I went anyway. I arrived 20 minutes late, blending into the back with a glass of sparkling water. Nobody noticed me, not at first. The new leadership team stood in a semicircle near the mic. Brad was already speaking. "We're stepping into a new era," he said, holding his craft beer like a prop, with fresh voices leading the charge. "People like Brittany, who've shown that courage, clarity, and innovation don't need 10 years of red tape to make impact." Applause, cheers, champagne, CL Inkstad. Then they unveiled the next-gen leadership board on a projector. Brittany's photo was second from the left. Mine wasn't there. Not even a "thanks for your years of service" slide. I was gone, like I'd never existed. That was when Diego saw me. He slipped through the crowd with that look, half horror, half guilt, and pulled me aside. "You didn't know?" he asked. I just raised an eyebrow. They're replacing you. It's official now. Brittany's listed as acting compliance lead. Brad said you transitioned out quietly. I thought you were on sabbatical or something. I didn't say a word, just sipped my drink. Let the silence stretch. "Lyra, I think they're trying to avoid your bonus." I smiled then, not because it was funny, but because it confirmed everything I suspected. "I know," I said, "and therefore days too early." Diego blinked. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer, just patted his shoulder and walked away. Back home, I opened a fresh doc and titled it Exit Dossier. I copied in screenshots, emailed clause excerpts, policy violations. I pulled Slack logs, flagged Brittany's incorrect legal summaries, highlighted every procedural breach. Then I wrote a final memo to myself, outlining the precise timeline of my removal, every instance of duty reassignment, every contract red line they ignored, every compliance risk they exposed themselves to. It was meticulous, cold, surgical. I'd spent a decade saving this company from itself. Now, I was watching it bleed. 3 days later, it happened. A calendar invite, quick sync HR Brad, minus 15 minutes, no details, no agenda. Just the two people who'd ghosted me for a month, suddenly available. I knew exactly what it meant. I wore navy, professional, forgettable, printed 3 copies of my contract, highlighted clause 7.4b in all of them, slipped one into a folder, one into my purse, and one into a sealed envelope marked legal hold. When I entered the conference room, Brad gave me that rehearsed smile, the one he used on investor calls and interns. HR rep Susan looked uncomfortable. The air felt humid with fake empathy. "Thanks for joining on short notice," Brad started. "We wanted to talk through some transitions happening on the team. With the new compliance vision taking shape, we've decided it's time to sunset some legacy roles and explore fresh perspectives." I nodded. "Sounds like a script." Suzanne coughed. Brad kept going. "This isn't a reflection of your contributions. You've done great work here. We just think the company's evolving, and we need to align our talent with our future trajectory." "Hung," I said, unsealing the envelope. "Before we go further, I'd like this acknowledged and time-stamped for the record." Brad frowned. "What is that?" "Clause 7.4b, I said, sliding it across the table. "Termination within 14 days of annual bonus vesting. Triggers a profit share payout. Legally binding. Not updated. Not waived." He blinked. I watched it land. That perfect second of silence when ego collides with paperwork. "Wasn't aware of this clause," he said. "I know," I said. "You never asked what I actually do, remember?" Susan's hands trembled slightly as she read the highlighted section. "I'm going to need to escalate this," she murmured. "I've already CC'd legal," I replied, and uploaded a compliance breach package to the shared drive. "Password is the vesting date." Brad looked pale. "Lyra, this isn't how we wanted this to go." I took my folder, left my badge. "Oh, Brad," I said gently, "this went exactly how I wanted it to go." And I walked out, calm, clean, silent. I didn't tweet, didn't rant, didn't go to the press, just waited. 3 days later, the internal chaos started. The first sign was the silence. No follow-up emails, no exit paperwork, no thank you notes, just ... nothing. I'd walked out of Ridgeline on a Thursday. By Monday, the Slack channel I'd been removed from exploded. I couldn't see it, but Diego could. He sent me a text. "What did you do? They're losing their minds. Ligo just pulled 2 all-nighters." I didn't reply, just stared at the blinking cursor on my screen, then back at the login to my private Gmail. My draft was ready. It wasn't a rant or even a threat, just a clean, 5-line email addressed to Ridgeline's legal team, with a PDF copy of the clause, a digital and a subject line that said everything. Trigger notice. Clause 7.4b. Effective immediately sent. 12 hours later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, Ridgeline's external counsel, a woman with a polite voice, but no warmth. Lyra, we're reaching out to clarify some language around your exit terms, she said, skipping introductions. I let her talk, let her fumble through polite corporate riddles about intent, context, and non-standard clauses. When she finally paused, I spoke slowly. You had 6 years to revise that clause. You chose not to. Your mistake isn't my burden. Silence. We'd like to discuss a mutual resolution, she said eventually. You mean a payout? I replied. Great. My banking details are in the document footer. Clock's ticking. And then, I hung up. They'd expected a mess. Anger, panic, begging. What they got was silence. Surgical moves. That's the thing about underestimating people who keep their heads down. They don't shout when they strike. They document by Wednesday. The CFO had resigned. Not publicly, of course, just a quiet internal memo. Personal reasons, but Diego texted again. Shasterisk T's on fire. Your clause hit finance like a pipe bomb. They're now digging through old contracts. Brad's panicking. Apparently, I wasn't the only one they'd fired near bonus season. There were others, 4 of us, from different departments, all tenured, all systematically edged out just weeks before vesting. But only mine had that clause. The others, nothing to stand on, so they started whispering, asking questions, reaching out. I stayed silent. I wasn't their savior. I wasn't building a movement. I was collecting, watching, listening. That Friday, exactly 1 week after I walked out, the transfer hit my account. $1.4 million, clean, silent, no NDA, no conditions, no apology. They tried to follow it up with a consulting offer. $20,000 for a 6-month silence window. I didn't reply, just printed the letter, shredded it, and dropped the pieces in my compost bin like coffee grounds. The news started leaking within a week. At first, it was just whispers in Slack groups, former employees posting vagues, a couple of Reddit threads from ex-staffers speculating about the clause. Then a screenshot got out, a redacted version of my contract, with clause 7.4b circled in yellow. Someone titled the thread, The Anchor Clause, How Ridgeline Screwed Themselves. It blew up. Hundreds of comments, then thousands, people analyzing it like a legal thriller, screenshots flying. Others came forward, employees who'd been quietly pushed out in similar ways. One had screenshots of Brad calling them deadweight legacy hires. Another had an email from HR saying they should be proud to step aside for the company's new vision. It wasn't just about me anymore. The internet loves a quiet revenge story, especially when it's legal, especially when it's clean. I didn't say a word, not online, not in interviews, not in Buckchannels, but someone else did. A week after the Reddit thread blew up, Brittany posted a photo on LinkedIn, her and Brad, posed at a company offsite. Caption: leading from the front, so grateful to help shape the future of Ridgeline. She turned off comments within an hour. Because within 20 minutes, someone had replied with a screenshot of one of her botched contracts, the Oregon vendor deal, the one I flagged, the one that didn't include a termination clause. It had cost Ridgeline $900,000 in penalties, and it had her initials on it, not mine. The thread went viral. By Monday, Brittany's LinkedIn was gone, deleted, vanished, no trace. By Tuesday, Brad was placed on indefinite leave, not fired, just quietly extracted, like a tumor they didn't want to admit had spread. Diego called me that night. We hadn't spoken by phone since everything went down. He didn't even say hello, just breathed into the silence for a few seconds, then said, "You did it." I didn't respond. He tried again. "I mean, you really did it. They're unraveling. Legals throwing out every contract written before 2020. Everyone's scared. The board wants heads." They had a choice, I said finally. They made the wrong one. "Lyra," he said softly, "they're calling your contract the anchor. Like, literally, that's what people are calling it now. They say you sank the whole ship with one clause." It was quiet for a moment. "Good," I said. "Let them remember." A month later, I went to my cousin's wedding in Portland. Big family affair. The kind where everyone pretends they're not measuring success in jobs and waistlines, but they are. I hadn't seen most of them in years. Last time we'd been in a room together, I was still at that startup, and my mother was telling everyone I'd probably go back to law school once the company sold. That night, I wore black, minimal jewelry, clean lines, Nothing flashy, but expensive if you knew where to look. My aunt cornered me near the shrimp station. So, are you still with that? Ridge Company. I smiled. Nope, I left last month. Oh no, she said, frowning. That's too bad. Downsizing. I just shrugged. She nodded sympathetically. It's okay, something else will come. You're smart. Before I could reply, my brother, who knew the whole story, slid in beside me. She's not looking, he said dryly. She got a 7-figure payout, walked out richer than their entire board. My aunt blinked. What? He grinned. She wrote their contracts. They fired her too early. Now she owns 20% of their last quarter. Look it up. Her face twisted, confused, skeptical, impressed, offended, all at once. I just sipped my wine. Later that night, I caught my reflection in the hotel elevator mirror. Same face, same tired eyes, but something was different. Not rage, not pride, just a quiet stillness. They'd tried to erase me, make me a footnote. Instead, I became the clause every executive feared. Not because I sued, not because I shouted, but because I read the fine print and waited. That weekend, 3 Ridgeline employees reached out to me privately. All of them had been edged out. All wanted advice, not revenge, just protection. I told them what I knew, helped them draft inquiries, sent them contract templates. One of them texted after getting a settlement, "You're not a whistleblower, you're a legend." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because something deeper had shifted, not just in Ridgeline, but in me. For the first time in 10 years, I slept without tension in my jaw, ate without my stomach clenching, walked without checking my phone every 10 minutes. I had time, I had power, I had peace. And yet, the story wasn't over. Because just as the dust was settling, as Ridgeline scrambled to clean up its mess and rewrite history, I got a letter. A real one. Paper. Hand-delivered. No return address. But I knew the envelope. Ridgeline's legal stationery. Inside, a 2-page letter. Formal, cold, but buried in legal speak was the message. We are prepared to offer an additional discretionary amount in exchange for a full retroactive NDA and non-disparagement agreement, effective as of your date of termination. Translation. They wanted me to disappear, erase the ripple, buy back the silence they assumed they owned from the start. They offer $20,000. A slap in the face. I didn't respond. Didn't even shred it this time, just burned it in the fireplace and watched the paper curl inward like it was trying to hide. But something in me reignited because if they were still scared, still reaching out, that meant the ripple was still growing. That meant the lesson hadn't landed yet. That meant this wasn't over. Not until everyone knew how dangerous silence could be when it was intentional. Not until people stopped assuming that quiet meant powerless. Not until the anchor clause wasn't just a fluke but a warning. So, I opened my laptop and I started writing. The first time someone referred to me as the woman who killed Ridge, I was standing in line at a coffee shop in Soma, waiting for an oat milk latte I didn't want. I turned slightly, just enough to see the 2 men whispering behind me. They weren't subtle. One of them pointed, the other glanced down at his phone, then back at me. "Yeah," the second one murmured. "That's her, the compliance chick. I heard they're still paying her to stay quiet." I didn't flinch, just smiled at the barista, took the cup, and walked out like I hadn't heard. They were wrong, of course. Ridgeline hadn't paid me to stay quiet. They'd offered, pathetically, desperately. I'd refused. But they were right. About one thing. I had killed something, not the company itself. Ridgeline still stood, technically. The website was up. Press releases still trickled out. But the version of Ridgeline that once thrived, untouchable, arrogant, slick with startup sparkle, was dead. And everyone in the valley knew it. And I hadn't said a word. That was the beauty of it. The poetry. I never once raised my voice. Never posted a thread. Never leaked a single document. All I did was follow the rules they'd written, better than they could. The firestorm they were in, they lit it. I just made sure it didn't go out. After the wedding. After the payout. After the letter they sent, trying to buy my silence for the cost of a mid-range refrigerator. I went still for a few weeks. No interviews, no podcast invitations. I wasn't interested in being anyone's revenge, fantasy, or empowerment mascot. But the messages didn't stop. LinkedIn. DMIS from junior analysts, Slack pings from people who had heard the story and wanted help reviewing their own contracts, legal interns asking if I'd mentor them, even to burned out HR execs from rival companies, quietly requesting clause audits, just in case. At first I ignored them. I didn't owe anyone anything. I'd spent 10 years cleaning other people's messes. I was tired. I wanted to be left alone. But then someone sent me a contract that made my chest tighten. It belonged to a woman named Erin, early 50s, worked 12 years at a different logistics company, operations lead, handled crisis response and emergency supply chain pivots during COVID, carried the team through chaos, then laid off 3 days before her retirement stock matured. No severance, no equity, no warning, got just a thank you mug. That her message was short. No theatrics, no begging, just one line. I don't need revenge. I just need to understand where I went wrong. I stared at it for a long time. Then I opened the file. 2 hours later, I'd annotated the entire thing, highlighted every weak point, every exploitative clause, every term she could have negotiated but didn't know she could. I attached a 3-page summary. No fluff, just facts. I clicked send. She replied, "This is the first time I've felt seen in a year. Thank you." That's when it shifted. I wasn't just the woman who walked away with $1.4 million. I was the woman who knew. And suddenly, people were listening. The first media story dropped in January. It wasn't about me. Not directly. It was a deep dive into Ridgeline's internal collapse, published by a mid-tier tech site known for credible leaks. The headline was mild. Inside Ridgeline's quiet restructure, bonuses, layoffs, and a compliance crisis. But the details, brutal. Anonymous quotes from former employees, screenshots of Brittany's botched deals, mentions of the infamous Clause 7.4b. And buried halfway through, a line that made me exhale slowly. Sources claim that a single overlooked clause in a veteran employee's contract triggered a multi-million-dollar payout and sent shockwaves through Ridgeline's legal and financial departments. No name, no photo, just a myth, a ghost with a signature. But the calls started again, this time from bigger names, CNN, Bloomberg, TechCrunch, all offering platforms, interviews, op-eds. I ignored them, until one message came from a legal podcaster I respected, a woman named Tamsin, who used to work in corporate law before going independent. Her message wasn't a pitch. It was an invitation. No pressure, just space. If you ever want to talk about what happens when the system eats the wrong person. I sat with it for 2 days, then said yes. The episode was recorded in her kitchen. No studio, just 2 mics and a cat that kept interrupting us. I didn't name didn't name anyone. I talked about contracts, about how we teach people to chase jobs but not terms, about how silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. By the time the episode aired, it had 800,000 listens in 3 days, and my inbox broke. I started taking clients privately, not for revenge, for armor. I helped them understand their contracts, flag hidden clauses, negotiate terms with their eyes open. Mostly women, mostly over 40, mostly the people companies leaned on until they became too expensive. It felt real, not glamorous, not viral, but purposeful. I named the service Fine Print, just a one-woman consultancy. No marketing, no growth hacking, just referrals. I capped it at 10 clients a month, enough to stay sharp, enough to protect people like Erin before they got erased. And then one day, I got an unexpected message from Diego. "You need to see this. I'm sending you a screenshot. Do not share it." What he sent me made my blood run cold. It was a Slack message. Internal. From Ridgeline's interim VP of strategy, addressed to the senior leadership team. The subject line, the anchor clause policy response draft. I read it twice, then a third time. They weren't just trying to recover, they were trying to rewrite history. The memo outlined a proposed internal communications plan, reframing what happened with me as a procedural anomaly, stemming from outdated contract systems. They wanted to position it as a learning moment, spin it into a case study on legacy compliance gaps and resilience through modern leadership. They were calling my contract a bug. And worse, they planned to publish a white paper, use it as content, turn my silence into branding. My hands clenched into fists. I'd let them walk into the fire. I'd let them burn quietly. But now they wanted to stand in the ashes and build a stage, pretend they controlled the narrative. Pretend they learned a lesson instead of being dragged by it, and suddenly, I realized I wasn't done. This story wasn't finished. Not until they stopped pretending they buried me, instead of being buried by me. The annual Ridgeline Summit was in 2 weeks. An invitation on the event, broadcast live, investors, media, analysts, new product launches, big speeches. Diego confirmed they were going ahead with it, despite the chaos, despite the resignations, and yes, they were planning to unveil their resilience strategy. There would be a section on compliance, a panel led by Brad's interim replacement. Topic: What we learned from the Claus era. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just opened a new folder on my desktop. Title: Final Move. I didn't buy a ticket, didn't fake a press pass, didn't hack their system. I RSVP'd with my real name, full legal, and they approved it without hesitation. Because that's what happens when you erase someone so thoroughly. You forget they still exist. Ridgeline's summit team didn't even blink. They saw Lyra Bennett and probably assumed I was press, or an old vendor, or just another harmless observer. They didn't realize the ghost was walking through the front door. The summit was held at a glitzy convention center in Palo Alto, all brushed steel, staged lighting, and fake grass walls with words like impact and integrity spelled out in neon cursive. The lobby buzzed with name badges and espresso carts. PR handlers floated like drones in black blazers. Everyone smiled too wide, walked too fast. I blended in. Black blazer, subtle heels, a silver ring I'd worn for years, now polished to a shine. No makeup, just clean skin and cold eyes. I didn't need to perform. I was there for one thing, and it was scheduled for 2:10 p.m. The panel, Building Resilience in a Modern Workforce. Subtopic: Compliance Evolution. What the past taught us about progress. Speakers included Natalie Quinn, Interim Head of Compliance, Zach Eves, VP Strategy Moderator, someone from tech. A sponsor blog. The official description made me sick. In today's fast-paced market, learning from internal missteps is critical to forward momentum. This panel will explore how Ridgeline pivoted from outdated contract models to agile, human-centric compliance solutions, turning a moment of friction into fuel for future innovation. Friction. They called me Friction. I didn't sit in the front. That's not how this worked. I took a seat 2 rows back from the stage, aisle side, perfect sightline. I could see the moderator's notes. The panelists filed in late. Natalie first, tall, sharp, bob, minimalist dress. She looked like someone who'd practiced her lines in the mirror 100 times. Zach followed, smile too tight, tied a bold. He carried a tablet, not for notes, for control. I could tell they did. The moderator laid the groundwork, mentioned transitional moments, referenced the Claus era without naming me. There was a slight chuckle from someone in the audience. Natalie smiled through it. We saw a breakdown in legacy documentation. She said smoothly. What looked like risk became opportunity. I watched her say it, watched her call the payout opportunity. They weren't apologizing. They were rebranding. The very thing that cost them millions. Pretending it made them better. And the audience nodded, clapped. Took notes, because they didn't know. They didn't know. So I raised my hand. The moderator squinted. We'll take audience questions in a bit, but I'd like to ask something now, I said, loud enough to cut through the hum. Natalie froze. Zach turned his head. The moderator blinked. What's your name? He asked. I stood. Lyra Bennett. A sound passed through the audience. A ripple. Someone gasped. Another whispered. The room shifted. People turned. Someone dropped their pen. Natalie's face drained of color. Zach's tablet tilted slightly in his hand. I stepped into the aisle. Calm, precise. I just have one question, I said, eyes on Natalie. When you say the Claus era was a breakdown in legacy documentation, are you referring to the legally binding contract your company failed to update for 6 years, which resulted in the largest individual payout in Ridgeline's history? Silence, then a few scattered murmurs. The moderator looked like he wanted to disappear into his blazer. Natalie opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Zach stepped forward, fake confidence coating every word. I'm not sure this is the right. I cut him off. It's absolutely the right place. You're presenting this as evolution, framing it like you turned a mistake into momentum. But let's clarify what actually happened. Your team ignored contract updates for almost a decade. You laid off senior employees within days of their vesting windows, employees who carried your legal frameworks for years. And when one of those employees leveraged a clause you failed to eliminate, You paid out over 7 figures, not because you're evolved, because you were sloppy. Gasps now, phones raised, screens lit up, people recording. You're trying to make this a success story, I said, steady. But what this actually is a case study in corporate negligence, and the power of one person paying attention when everyone else stops. I stepped back, folded my arms, waited. The moderator tried to salvage it. We appreciate perspectives, and we'll be taking formal questions in the breakout room after but the room was already alive. Whispers rising, half the audience turned to look at each other, instead of the stage. One woman walked out shaking her head. A man stood up, clapped once, then left. Natalie sat frozen. Zach stared at the back wall. I turned, walked out slowly, didn't run, didn't hide. I didn't need to say anything else. The rest would handle itself. I thought that would be the end, the final blow, but it wasn't, because someone filmed the entire thing, and that someone posted it not to TikTok, not to Twitter, but to Glassdoor under Ridgeline's review page, with the caption, "Remember the anchor clause." She showed up. The video hit 2 million views in 48 hours. The comments were feral. The story made it to business podcasts, Reddit, and eventually, news cycles. Ridgeline tried to pull it down, issued a takedown request claiming copyright violation. But it was too late. The video had already spread, and so had the truth. A week later, I got a call from a reporter I actually respected. She asked me what I wanted from all this. Nothing, I said, not revenge. No, then why show up? I paused, then answered slowly, because I was never trying to burn the building down. I just wanted them to stop pretending they didn't throw me out in the cold and light a match. She didn't say anything for a second. Then, that's going to be the headline, and it was. But Ridgeline wasn't done yet, because people like that never die quiet. 2 days after the story hit the front page of Tech, I received an envelope. No name, no sender, just a crisp piece of paper inside. "You've made your point. Don't forget, we still know where your lines end." No signature, but I knew the tone. I'd heard it in Brad's voice, threats disguised as diplomacy. And that's when I knew they weren't afraid I'd spoken. They were afraid I wasn't done. They were right, but because what I did next, they didn't see coming. Not from me, from the woman they erased, not from the clause they called a bug. I didn't write another speech, didn't post a thread, didn't start a lawsuit. I wrote a guide. I titled the document, Burn Proof, The Working Person's Guide to Never Being Erased. It wasn't pretty, not poetic, not designed for social media virality or corporate HR reposts. Just 23 pages of raw truth, plain language, and hard-earned warnings, bullet points, examples, contract clauses decoded in English, not legalese, no branding, no logo. No footer, begging for donations or follows. Just this at the top, to the ones they fired right before Christmas, right before bonuses, right before vesting. I see you. Now see this. And at the bottom, written by someone who read the fine print and lived to cash it. I didn't post it to LinkedIn, didn't blast it on Twitter. I emailed it to exactly 5 people, all women, all over 40, all recently restructured. No strings, no press release, no grand reveal. Within a week, it had over 40,000 downloads. Someone turned it into a slideshow. Another built a Canva version. Then came the threads, the summaries, the email forwards from HR interns to their cousins who just got job offers. Burn Proof became a Whisper Network blueprint. Passed in DMIs, tucked inside onboarding folders, whispered at brunches, shared between moms at PTA fundraisers. And Ridgeline. They tried to bury it. Quietly launched their own employee empowerment toolkit. Flimsy PDFs, buzzwords, graphics with fake quotes from fake employees, smiling like they'd just had successful dental surgery, but it was too late. The story was out, and they weren't the authors. I didn't take clients anymore. Didn't need to. My inbox was full of people telling me they negotiated better packages, spotted bad terms, walked away with heads high and futures intact. One woman got a $60,000 signing bonus because she quoted a clause from my guide that her hiring manager didn't even understand. A man emailed to say his wife cried when he renegotiated her exit after reading Burn Proof. Another said simply, "You made me dangerous in a room where they assumed I was deaf." That's what this was always about. Not revenge. Not money. Not even justice. Memory. Because when they fire you, they don't just want you gone, they want you forgotten. They want the meetings you led, the policies you built, the fires you put out all erased. They want the new person to take your credit, your desk, your future. And I refused. I refused to be their cautionary tale. I became theirs. 6 months after the summit, I got one final letter. It came not from Ridgeline, but from a law firm repping one of their major investors. A warning: we advise the immediate cessation of any continued publication of proprietary or potentially defamatory materials related to our client and its internal operations. They didn't name the guide, didn't name me directly, but they didn't have to. I read it once, then wrote a single-sentence reply. If you believe I've published anything inaccurate, feel free to sue me and prove it. They never replied, because they knew everything I said was true, everything I did was legal, and worst of all, everything I released was now everywhere. They couldn't delete it, couldn't spin it, couldn't anchor it. 1 year to the day after they fired me, I went back to the Ridgeline office, not inside, just outside. Sat on a bench across the street with a coffee, watched as employees buzzed in and out. New badges, new faces, new executives who probably didn't even know my name. That's how it goes. The machine replaces you, resets, pretends you were never there. But something had changed. I watched a young woman step out of the building, maybe mid-30s. Sharp blazer, backpack slung over one shoulder. She paused, took out her phone, checked something, then smiled. I couldn't see the screen, didn't need to. I recognized the look. It was the look of someone who knew, someone who wasn't going to be erased, someone who, when the time came, would have her own claws. And I realized, I was never the fire, I was the match, the first one, but not the last. Later that night, I went home, poured a glass of wine, and opened the last box I hadn't unpacked since leaving Ridgeline. Inside, my old ID badge, a notebook full of flagged errors from 2019, a printed copy of the contract, and one yellow post-it note I'd scribbled during a breakdown in 2020 that read, "You are not crazy, you are correct. They just want you to forget." I smiled, tucked the note back in, closed the box, and finally, let it go. They didn't win. They never did. They just hadn't realized it until too late, because people like me, we don't scream, we don't beg, we outlast. And that's what they'll remember me for. Not as an employee, not as a mistake, not even as a threat, but as the clause they should have deleted, and never did.